You know that feeling, right? When you're so completely lost in a book or a movie that the real world just fades away? What is that magic? And, maybe more importantly, how is it made? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at the actual blueprint that holds up every great story.
Yeah, the writer John Gardner had this amazing way of putting it. He called it the vivid and continuous dream. And that's really the fundamental promise of all great fiction, isn't it? To pull us in so deep that we totally forget we're just, reading words on a page. The big question, though, is how do writers build a dream that feels so real it keeps us from ever wanting to wake up?
Well, it turns out that dream isn't just some abstract magic, it's mechanics. Behind every single one of those seamless stories, there's a really carefully constructed framework. And to understand it, we've got to separate the building materials from the architectural design itself.
All right, so here's the absolute key to unlocking all of this, and it comes from a theorist named Seymour Chapman. He breaks every single narrative down into two basic parts, story and discourse. The story, well, that's just the raw material. It's the simple, chronological stuff, this happened, then this happened. But the discourse is where all the artistry lives. It's how that raw material gets shaped and presented to us.
Okay, let's make this super clear. The story of the Titanic, it's simple. A huge ship gets built, it sails, it smacks into an iceberg, and it sinks. That's the what. But the discourse is how James Cameron tells it, through the memories of an elderly Rose, jumping back and forth in time, focusing everything on this epic love story. See, the exact same story could have been a dry documentary, told through a totally different discourse.
So, if the story is the what, let's start with its most basic element, the plot, the sequence of events. Is there some kind of universal formula for it all, like a master plot for every story ever told? And you know what? A whole group of thinkers, the structuralists, they were convinced they had it all figured out.
So you have this guy, a folklorist named Vladimir Prop. He analyzed hundreds of Russian folktales, and he came to this incredible conclusion. He argued that even though the characters and the settings were always different, the fundamental actions, what he called functions, were always the same, and they always happen in the same order.
And these functions are so specific, it's kind of wild. I mean, think about almost any classic fairy tale, or even something huge like Star Wars. An aggressor causes harm, the Empire blows up Alderaan. The hero leaves home, Luke blasts off Tatooine, the hero gets pursued, he gets rescued, and on and on. Prop believe you could find these same building blocks, in the same order, in tons of stories. It's like they're all built from the same Lego set.
But, of course, a lot of writers hear that and think, no way, that's just way too formulaic. John Gardner, for instance, argued that a really compelling plot isn't about checking off a list of events. It grows from the inside out. It comes from a character who's facing a genuinely tough moral choice. The real tension isn't about what happens next, but why a character chooses to make it happen.
And not right there, that idea, it leads us straight into the next huge debate. And this one really gets to the heart of storytelling. What is a character? Are they a believable, thinking, feeling person, or are they just a pawn that the plot moves around the board?
So, for the structuralists, the answer was easy, like super clear. They argued that character is totally secondary. A character only exists to do a job. The hero is just the one who fights the bad guy. The donor is just the one who gives the hero a magic sword. Who they are deep down, their hopes, their dreams, totally irrelevant.
Another theorist, Roland Barthes, took this idea and cranked it up a notch. He called them actants. Forget psychology. Just ask what their job is. Is this character the subject who wants something? Is that one the helper who gives him a tool, or the opponent who's in the way? In this view, their whole identity is basically their job title.
But then you have Seymour Chapman, and he just wasn't buying it. He pushed back, and he pushed back hard against this. He argued for what he called an open theory of character. He said, look, that's not how we experience characters. We experience them as people, as complex, messy, and seemingly real individuals.
And this is the really cool part of his open theory. The author only gives us clues and bits of evidence. It's us, the audience, who take those pieces and actively reconstruct the character in our own minds. We're the ones who fill in the gaps with our own knowledge of people, creating someone who feels real enough to exist even after the story ends.
Okay, so we've got our events, we've got our characters, but how do we actually see all this stuff? This brings us to maybe the most powerful tool in the whole narrator's toolkit, perspective. The choices made here control literally everything we know and feel. Okay, first we got to wrap our heads around this idea of the implied author. Now, this isn't the real person who wrote the book, and it's not the narrator telling the story. It's the invisible force, the consciousness that's shaping the story's values. Think about that cynical, world-weary vibe in a classic detective novel, or that witty, sharp intelligence behind a Jane Austen book. That's the implied author. It's the mind of the work itself.
And this just adds this whole other layer of mystery to it, right? As James Joyce asks here, does the artist even really know what they're doing? Does the real-life author even have full control over that implied author they're creating? Maybe not.
So, within that big design, the narrator has to make another critical choice: focalization. It sounds complicated, but really it just boils down to one simple question. Through whose eyes are we seeing the events? Are we flying around with a narrator who knows everything about everyone, or are we stuck inside the head of one single, flawed character? That one choice changes everything about how we understand the story.
All right, we have looked at a lot of the machinery here. Story versus discourse, plot, character, perspective. So the big question is, does knowing all this stuff, does pulling back the curtain actually ruin the magic? Does it kill the dream?
No way. Not at all. In fact, it's the opposite. Understanding the how, the discourse, doesn't ruin the magic. It makes you appreciate the incredible artistry behind it even more. You go from being just a passive dreamer to an active participant who can see and admire the skill it took to build that dream in the first place. This is what John Gardner called reading like a writer. And it's a total game changer. You're not just asking, what does this story mean anymore? You're asking, how did the author do that? You're looking at the blueprint, admiring the architecture, and learning from the masters.
So here it is, your new toolkit for reading, for watching, for experiencing any story. The next time you find yourself getting lost in one, just try to step back for a second, ask yourself these 4 questions, see if you can spot the blueprint. It's a whole new way of seeing the stories you already love.
Because look, once you can see the blueprint behind the dream, you don't just appreciate stories on a whole new level. You start to understand the power to tell your own. So the question is, what will you see now that you really know how to look?